Anis leróid Daithí Mháistir Fheis Éirígí, from socialism alone can the salvation of Ireland come.
After a considerable period of party-wide debate and discussion, lasting somewhere in the region of a year from inception to conclusion, Éirígí members recently endorsed a document outlining their collective position with regard to the question of socialism and the economic organisation of society. To be blunt and to the point, we, like Connolly, are unequivocal in our belief that from socialism alone can the salvation of Ireland come. And for this reason, we have used this maxim of his as the document's title. And there are copies of the document in Irish and English available for people here today. While it may have struck some at the time that our decision to form an avowedly revolutionary socialist republican organisation, at what was then the height of the so-called Celtic Tiger in 2006, was at best misguided or naive, and at worst quite simply crazy, those of us involved in founding Éirígí were in fact convinced of the correctness of our overall economic and political analysis, and of the need for militant Republicans to regroup and reorganise for the coming inevitable fight. Many commentators argued that the so-called national question had been resolved, and that the historical battle against capitalism and for socialism had been lost. History had ended, they said, and the real task now, it was argued, was for former revolutionaries to come in from the cold, so to speak, and accommodate themselves to reality. We chose differently. While we were very conscious of the extremely weak condition which the Republican Socialist community in Ireland found itself in at the beginning of the 21st century, we nonetheless rededicated ourselves to establishing an organisation that could contribute towards achieving the interrelated goals of social and national liberation in Ireland. For us, history had not ended. Our stance has been vindicated by all that has transpired and is transpiring as we speak economically. It has been vindicated also by the way in which the so-called peace process has unfolded since that time. We have entered a period where the tectonic plates of history have once again begun to shift. The pressure is becoming too great for the centre to hold. The polarisation of the world between those who do and do not have access to the resources necessary for survival and an economic and social standard of living befitting membership of the human race is as marked today as it ever has been in the history of humankind. The processes that underlie this fact have directly given rise to a scenario whereby humanity as a whole finds itself poised precariously in the balance. Globally, we are facing ever more frequent and increasingly dangerous economic, environmental and social disasters of such magnitude that the very real potential exists that at some future juncture life on earth might indeed cease. This is not a case of melodramatic exaggeration, but rather a cold statement of fact. The ideology of free market capitalism, based upon the exploitation of the working class of the world, and valuing and promoting as it does the quest for the accumulation of material wealth over all other considerations, is directly responsible for the growing possibility that this ultimate and final human disaster might indeed one day come to pass. After the biggest global economic meltdown for over 70 years, there are now very few outside of the most vested interests who will argue that capitalism has anything to offer the vast majority of people who inhabit this earth, anything other than a continuation of increasing social instability and economic crisis. Given that what is at stake is the very future of our society, we as a party are actively directing all of our energies towards creating the conditions whereby we might someday have the opportunity and the requisite power to do something about all of those things that define our social reality under imperialism and capitalism, and in a very real way make it unjust and oftentimes intolerable. For it is not the goal of successfully winning and wielding power, the power to transform society, Is this not the primary objective motivating all of those who profess to be political revolutionaries? We have made a good start in this regard. Éirígí is now an organisation that has entered into the political arena in a very real and very significant way. For a small organisation, Éirígí is very rapidly shaping up into a real political entity with lots of potential. One of the things that has helped bring us to where we are today has been the fact that over the last 4.5 years, we have been guided in our endeavours to rebuild a revolutionary republican movement by the principle that those who fail to learn the lessons of the past are doomed to repeat its errors. At Éirígí's inception, we resolved not to reenact the sad old tragedies of the past, but rather we acknowledged that the imperative for the achievement of our objectives was, in the immediate term, the development of an organisation anchored in the solid foundations of a coherent revolutionary ideology. 4.5 years after the establishment of Éirígí, the party has reached another significant milestone along the road in this regard with the publication of this major ideological position paper. From socialism alone can the salvation of Ireland come is not only an important development for Éirígí as a political party, it is also an important development for socialist republicanism in Ireland. We can now state with confidence and without fear of contradiction that the goal of building a viable revolutionary movement is alive and well in Ireland. From socialism alone can the salvation of Ireland come does not simply offer a rhetorical and blanket rejection of capitalism. It also outlines Éirígí's vision of an alternative socio-political system based upon public ownership of the means of production, distribution and exchange. We believe that this document lays down the theoretical foundations for a powerful movement in Ireland that will be uncompromisingly both republican and socialist. A revolutionary republican movement that has class politics at the core of its analysis. A movement that will never again allow itself to be diverted into the historical cul-de-sacs of militarism and constitutionalism, or indeed to commit the pernicious mistake of believing that Labour can and must wait. The process by which Éirígí developed and adopted from socialism alone can the salvation of Ireland come was itself an example of the type of participative democracy that Éirígí wishes to see at the heart of a new socialist Ireland. This process saw an initial draft debated by the entire membership within their respective local circle. Each individual member was afforded the right to suggest deletions, additions and amendments to the document. Once the first round of discussion had been completed, a second draft of the paper, based upon the feedback received from the membership, was drafted. This second draft was then circulated to the entire membership and again debated within local circle. The feedback from this second round of discussions informed the drafting of the third and final draft of the document, which became From Socialism Alone Can the Salvation of Ireland Come. For the first time, a dispersed voting procedure was used, which saw members voting at meetings of their local circle on whether to adopt or reject the paper. As with all major strategic and policy issues, each member of the party had an equal vote. The result of this vote saw the paper being unanimously adopted. While the process of developing and adopting From Socialism Alone Can the Salvation of Ireland Come took a considerable period of time to complete, it was time well spent indeed. Éirígí's unique decision-making process, as contained within our constitution, places consensus building at the heart of a process of decision-making. Many Irish Republican and socialist organisations are based upon outdated and anti-democratic top-down models of decision-making. Such models are inherently unstable, leading to leadership cliques and internal divisions. Organisations which use delegate-based organisational models, pressure cooker conferences and artificial deadlines to make decisions are sometimes corrupted by leaderships who think they know better than their memberships. In the same way that we believe this document to be of ideological and political value, so too do we believe that there is much to be learned from the manner in which the document itself was formulated, debated and eventually adopted by the party.